Hi, Govan. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video I'm continuing my critique of the movies from the perspective of looking at plot changes that Peter Jackson made to the story that resulted in further plot holes or similar problems that just make his changes make no sense. So in this particular video I'm going to be talking about the Two Towers, and a lot of the issues here revolve around Theoden and Rohan. And some of them get a little bit complicated, but the issues they create ended up being pretty bad, even compared to the ones that I brought up in the Fellowship of the Ring. Speaking of which, if you haven't seen the Fellowship of the Ring video, I'll link that below so you can go back and watch that one. And without further ado, let's get started. So the first problem is related to Theoden's condition when Gandalf and Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli first arrive at the Golden Hall in Edoras. In the movie, basically Saruman has possessed him, and Grima is acting as kind of his regent, or I don't know. I mean, it's kind of really unclear how exactly Grima got into his position and why he's there, what he's doing. In the novel, it's a lot simpler. Grima has always been his counselor, but under the sway of Saruman, he has basically kind of pushed Theoden in the direction of don't be proactive, keep yourself safe here in Edoras, because really the main conflict between himself and Éomer in the novel is not so much that he's against fighting the orcs, because he knows that Saruman is actually the enemy in the novel, but Éomer wants to actually go out and proactively attack, the Uruk-hai that are wandering over Rohan. Theoden doesn't like that. That's the conflict there. But in the movie, the conflict basically comes down to Saruman has possessed him so completely that he really has no idea what's going on. And there's several different issues that arise out of this. The first problem that I want to talk about immediately is the fact that Theoden is very, very, very decrepit in the movie, and you get the idea that he is somewhat decrepit seeming in the novel as well, but I think in the movie they took it to a huge extreme. And that raises the question, nobody noticed that he just suddenly went from a relatively middle-aged looking kind of guy to, somebody who looks like he could croak any minute? That seems a little hard to believe. B, he's not in control of himself, which means Grima is basically doing everything for him or through him, maybe. It's really not clear because he has a signature from Theoden, which is of questionable validity in the movie. But Grima is basically running things by having a bunch of thugs make sure that nobody can kick him out of power. And these thugs, which, again, they're not present in the novel because they don't have to be. Grima is, basically just convincing Theoden to go along with what he wants him to do. And so Theoden is actually giving the commands and doing things on his own, in some sense. But in the movie, he's got these thugs that are, they're the ones that kick Éomer out and all this sort of thing. But there's only like a handful of them. No more than 10 for sure. And so the question is, if everybody can see that, Grima is being a bad influence on Theoden, Theoden has deteriorated way more rapidly than he should have, and where did these thugs come from anyway, then it raises the obvious question, why didn't anybody just have a coup against Grima? Because he's obviously the problem, and what's Theoden going to do? He's completely inert anyway, so wouldn't it make sense to just kind of, kick the thugs out and Grima along with them? But no, everybody just kind of treats it like Theoden really is still running the show, even though he's obviously not. And it makes everything just a tad bizarre, because first of all, you have to assume he either recruited these thugs out of Rohan itself, or he brought them in from outside. If he brought them in from outside, that ought to raise huge red flags. If he got them in from Rohan itself, then you have another question, like, where did he find these guys to, turn traitor? And, we know Éomer in the movie has like 2,000 guys with him. They couldn't just overthrow Grima and his 5 or 6 thugs. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's the first problem with Theoden's possession. The second problem relates more to his military strategy. So let's talk about that. So in the movie, after Theoden has been exorcised by Gandalf, which is itself kind of a weird thing, he then has to come up with a strategy of what to do. These two kids show up from one of the villages that have been burned and make it clear that Saruman's forces are basically destroying Rohan one village at a time. Gandalf, of course, is urging him to ride out and meet them. Aragorn brings up the fact that Éomer has a couple thousand men at his disposal and that they could use them to help fight. And Theoden's like, I don't want to bring further death to my people. I'm not going to risk open war. Aragorn says, open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not. And of course he's right. They've already made open war. They're burning villages and they're killing people. They've already killed his son, who was, dressed for war with a bunch of other warriors. So open war is definitely upon them. Now you could take Theoden's meaning to be, I'm not going to actually have an open battle with them, in the sense that, he plans to go to Helm's Deep and therefore just kind of ride it out. But that's not really what the words open war mean. But, let's take it for what it apparently means in the context. You still have a problem here because Theoden's strategy is basically go to Helm's Deep, wait them out, and then come back once they're done just kind of being pillagers. But as Aragorn points out, and this is kind of obvious without him having to point it out, the Uruk-hai aren't coming just to pillage and burn and then leave. That's not what orcs do. It never has been, never will be. And of course the men of Dunland, who are allied with the orcs in this particular situation, they want revenge against Rohan for all of the past history between them as well. And if you want to learn a little bit about that, you can watch my video on the history of Rohan. I'll link to that in the description. But this idea that Theoden is just planning to sit in Helm's Deep and wait for it all to kind of just wash over, it doesn't make any sense at all, because he's basically saying, I'm going to wait in Helm's Deep with what food and provision we have, and they're going to burn all the villages and all the crops, and then they're just going to leave, and we're going to come out and we're going to, replant and grow stuff again. What, the orcs aren't just going to come back as soon as you leave Helm's Deep? I mean, even assuming his strategy was viable in the short term, in the long term it's not, because they're just going to come back and attack again and never let you recuperate. That's not how these kind of wars work. And if you know anything about the history of Rohan, then you know that Helm's Deep has been used in that way before, but never with the intent of not coming out and eventually fighting off the hordes. It's a desperate situation to be in a siege, but it's a forced thing, not something that you just plan to just sit there forever. Another problem with this is Helm's Deep is like the closest fortress they have to Isengard. So if he's trying to avoid actually getting involved in a battle, he picked the worst place to go, period. You can't stay in Edoras, that's true, but there's Dunharrow, which is another major fortress of Rohan, and in fact in the novel, that's where he sends Éowyn with all of the civilians. He sends them to Dunharrow, and in the novel, the plan for the actual writers is to go to the Fords of Isen and just fight the orcs. Now, the reason they end up in Helm's Deep in the novel is because on their way there, somebody who is at the Battle of the Fords of Isen and escaped the route comes and basically says, the forces that you had at the Fords of Isen, they've been defeated and scattered. You don't have enough men to fight the orcs, and so that's why they pull into Helm's Deep, where they luckily meet up with a lot of the other people who escaped the Fords of Isen. So they end up in Helm's Deep in the novel as a last recourse, not as a first goal. And it makes a lot more sense, because there the goal is not just to ride out a siege until the orcs just get tired of burning stuff. And it also makes more sense because they end up in Helm's Deep because they're trying to get to Isengard, whereas in the movie they're trying to avoid getting into a battle, but they go as close to Isengard as they can possibly get to find a fortress to hide in. It doesn't make any sense. Now, in the movie, it's not really obvious because they never really show you much of a map, except where Faramir and his second in command, but I don't think we really know his name in the movie, are talking about, what's going on in Rohan and what's going on in Gondor. So you could catch it if you're paying attention, but they don't make it obvious that Helm's Deep is like the worst place you could go if you're trying to get away from orcs. But regardless, that's the problems with Theoden's military strategy. You've got the problem of you don't just sit in a siege because, and you also, if you're going to get into a fortress to get in a siege, you don't go as close as you can to the enemy before getting there. It doesn't make any sense. Now, the problems with the military stuff continue in the next segment. So in the Two Towers, we get this statement that Éomer has 2,000 men, and at Helm's Deep, Legolas basically says they have 300. Okay, where's the rest of the men of Rohan? Because in The Return of the King, Theoden ends up mustering 6,000 men. So this idea that he couldn't go out and meet Saruman's forces on his own because he didn't have enough men, and he couldn't get Éomer's, where's the other 4,000 that he came up with in The Return of the King? Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Another problem is, at Helm's Deep, Aragorn in the movie suggests, send out riders for aid, send them to Gondor, they'll answer the call. Now, in the movie, they kind of make it obvious that Gondor wouldn't have answered the call, even if Theoden had sent out riders. But the bigger problem is, how could they have possibly gotten to Gondor in time? It's a few days' journey. It's not like just a little, jaunt across the stream and there you are. That doesn't work. So, again, remember, Helm's Deep is about the closest fortress that they have to Isengard. They're as far west as they're going to get, pretty much. To get to Gondor, they would have to go all the way back east, past Edoras, which they had left. And Edoras isn't even right on the border with Gondor to begin with. And yet, Theoden just rejects the idea out of hand, basically saying there's no way we can get help. He doesn't really explain why. He just kind of blows it off as, Gondor didn't help us before. Well, before you weren't sending for help because Isengard had you possessed, so that doesn't make any sense. But what makes it even worse is in The Return of the King, he then turns around, and when Gandalf is talking about the fact that Gondor is going to need help finding Sauron's armies, he says, why should we ride to the aid of those who did not come to ours? And of course, Gandalf and Aragorn look at him like they're stunned, and of course they should be, because it's like, who was the one that decided not to ask Gondor for help? I mean, it's the same guy complaining that they didn't help him. I mean, this is one of the things that I really don't get. It's like they changed Theoden's character dramatically in the movies, such that he's constantly making completely nonsense decisions and being basically a petulant child the whole time, and it's so self-contradictory. And yes, petulant children can be self-contradictory because they're not thinking rationally, but I mean, he's the king of Rohan. He ought to be a little better than that. So that kind of wraps up the Rohan element of the contradictions created by Peter Jackson's plot changes. Now let's shift gears and talk about some different characters. Here's one that's not really creating a plot hole per se, but it does definitely change some character dynamics a lot. In the movie, we get a lot of extra sequences that don't really belong there, flashbacking to Aragorn and Arwen, and then showing Arwen with Elrond. And in all of this, you get the idea that Aragorn has kind of succumbed to Elrond's pressure and told Arwen to go into the west on the ships. Elrond is pressuring her as well. She wants to stay. In the novel, that never happens. None of it ever happens. The only thing really that goes down is Elrond tells Aragorn, if you're going to marry my daughter, you're going to be king of Gondor and Arnor first, so you better get after fulfilling your destiny. But in the movie, you have Elrond basically guilt-tripping Aragorn, and then Aragorn falls for that and basically tells Arwen to, go ahead and leave. And then we get this scene with Arwen and Elrond where Elrond tells her, you need to go, get on the ship, don't wait till it's too late, there's no hope. And Arwen says there is still hope, and they go back and forth a little bit, and then Elrond has some of these lines that are just, they make your skin crawl almost because he's being such a bad dude. First of all, he starts off telling her, Aragorn's going to die regardless, and you're going to be crushed one way or the other, which is true. That does happen in the novel. It comes up in the appendices, but basically it is true that, after Aragorn dies, Arwen is really hit by the whole mortality issue, and then she, like most elves who marry men, ends up basically dying of grief. And, so that element is true, but here Elrond is using it to manipulate her into just giving up on the whole idea of a romance with Aragorn to begin with. But that's not even the worst part. Then you get him saying, it's just terrible. He says, "Don't I also have your love?" And it's like the creepiest, most manipulative thing you can imagine him saying. And it's like, oh my gosh, you just turned Elrond into this disgusting person. And like I said, this doesn't create a plot hole, but Elrond is supposed to be a really good, wise, ancient elf. And elves are supposed to be, better than humans in this movie. The one constant in the movie is that humans are always portrayed as the weak ones. Elves are portrayed as these supremely good and wise people. And yet here we have Elrond just descending to the level of some of the worst possible passive-aggressive manipulation you can imagine in humanity. And it's like, when did Elrond become a scumbag? It's just, like I said, it makes my skin crawl, because it's one of the worst things that they did to any character in these movies. And not a plot hole, but it does make you question the entire character of Elrond to begin with. It's just sickening. So that's enough about elves. Let's talk about Ents. So in the movie, as in the novel, we have an Ent moot, where Treebeard meets with all these other Ents to discuss the issue of what are we going to do about Saruman, this guy who's causing all this trouble. Now, in the movie, as in the novel, the Ent moot takes quite a long time. Now, they kind of changed the timeline a little bit in the movie, because in the novel, it actually takes them like 2 or 3 days to get through the Ent moot. But Merry and Pippin ran into them several days before the Battle of Helm's Deep, too, so it works out. But that's not the change that really makes a difference here. The change that makes the difference is the decision in the movie that the Ents are not going to intervene in the war, that they're just going to ride things out, or as Treebeard says, weather the storm as they always have done. Now, that by itself doesn't create a plot hole, except then we get Pippin telling Treebeard, while he's walking them to the western edge of the forest, he says, "No, turn around, turn us south. If we go south, Saruman won't be expecting it. We can slip past him unnoticed because he won't be looking for us there." And Treebeard, he's like, "Well, maybe that works. I don't know. I'm too big for that, but you're small, so maybe it works." So he turns south. And they finally arrive at the edge of the forest, or what would have been the edge of the forest, and there's a huge swath of trees that have been cut down. And that's when Treebeard kind of changes his mind, makes this huge Ent roar, and all the Ents show up, and then they go to Isengard because they changed their mind. How did Treebeard not know this? This is one of the legitimate criticisms that CinemaSins made, although they missed kind of the real thrust of it, I think. Go back and watch my CinemaSins takedown video on the Two Towers. I'll link to that in the description as well. And they make a legitimate point here, but they miss the real strength of it. It's Treebeard is an Ent. He kind of listens to the trees. He knows what's going on in the forest, and yet he didn't know that this huge amount of clear cutting had been going on, which begs the question: why is he that mad about Saruman to begin with? Why are the Ents even meeting about it to do anything? So you've got that problem, but then you've also got the slightly related problem that if he's now suddenly mad enough to go against Isengard, what would have turned him to fight Isengard otherwise? It's like they made a decision not to fight Isengard because they didn't expect him to cut down any trees at all. He got through telling Pippin, he now has a mind of metal and wheels and no longer cares for growing things. It's like he already knows this is where this is going to go, even if it hadn't gone there already. But again, how did he not know about this? The weirder thing, though, is the movie kind of implies that Pippin did know about it. And how could he have known about it? Now, The reason I say that, and this is a matter of interpretation, so I could be a little off here, but Pippin, when he suggests going south, Merry's like, "Are you crazy? We're going to get caught." And he says, "No, we won't, not this time." And he says it with this expression on his face like he really knows what he's doing. And it makes you think that he knows that he's going to run into this huge clear-cut area and it's going to change Treebeard's mind. That's the way I take it anyway. And if I'm right, then that raises two other problems. How did Pippin know about this? The only things that he's seen the orcs do was chop up a little bit of firewood on the edge of Fangorn while they were still captives of the Uruk-hai. And the second problem it creates is, if he knew this already, why hadn't he just told Treebeard before the Ent Moot and gotten them to change their mind that way? So again, that's a matter of interpretation. I might be wrong. If everybody else out there thinks that it's kind of a different thing, then maybe tell me what you think Pippin's trying to accomplish by going south, because I can't think of a really better explanation. So that's just the only one I can come up with. But anyway, that wraps up basically everything except the ring bearers. Now let's go take a look at them, and that'll wrap up the video. So, with the ring bearers, there's one major point that comes up because of the way Peter Jackson changed Faramir. He made Faramir be basically Boromir with an earlier redemption point, as opposed to the novel where Faramir never wants to take the ring, never tries to take Frodo to Osgiliath. None of that ever happens in the novel. And this doesn't create a problem by itself, but while in Osgiliath, Frodo basically goes into like some kind of trance, walks up this stairway to a platform that's completely wide open. There's a Nazgul flying right above him in front of his face, and he's about to put on the ring before Sam stops him. Now, why is this a problem? Because in Cinema Sins, they constantly refer to the fact that the ring wraiths are terrible at actually finding the ring, and you can argue about whether that's a legitimate criticism in most cases, but here they flat out know Frodo has the ring now because he was literally just staring at him, looking at him, about to put it on his finger. So we know that they know that Frodo has the ring. Since they know Frodo has the ring, why did the orcs not just completely storm Osgiliath right then and there to try to recapture the ring? Sauron's primary goal in this entire novel is to recapture the ring, and the reason he doesn't is because he never knows where it is. In this scene, we have the Nazgul finding out, oh, it's right there, and they do nothing about it. Zero. They do absolutely nothing about it. They don't storm Osgiliath until we don't really know exactly how long it takes them, but it's at least the next night, because in The Return of the King, we see a nighttime scene where the orcs come across the river silently and storm the banks. So we know they at least wait till nightfall, when they know already that they've got enough forces to overrun Osgiliath if they want to. That being the case, there's no reason not to try to storm it now and get that ring while we know where it is, and we know we could get it if we really wanted to. So the problem here, there's a lot of other issues that I don't like about the fact that he changed Faramir's character, but this is the one that really creates a plot hole, because it's like, if he's really just trying to get the ring, and the ring is right there, and they know it, then they really ought to be trying a little harder to get it at this stage, because it's like, this is the best chance they've had in the entire series, and they're not going to get a better one. So it's just absolutely nuts that they go to the lengths of having Frodo, which doesn't make any sense anyway. Frodo in the novel never wants to just walk up to a ring wraith and put the ring on. It doesn't make any sense. So it's a completely counter to the story in the novel. Not only is it unnecessary, it makes no sense in the light of the novel, but further, to have him do that and then the Nazgul and armies of Sauron not do anything about it, somebody had their brain turned off. So anyway, that's pretty much all the contradictions and plot holes I could find as a result of changes that Peter Jackson made to the Two Towers. Next week we'll wrap up with the Return of the King, the third movie. So, hope you enjoyed that video. Hope my explanations of the plot holes and such made sense. Again, going back to Pippin, if you can think of an explanation for what Pippin is doing or his motivations that doesn't create a plot hole, let me know, because I really can't think of one. If you did enjoy the video, though, please give it a thumbs up. Please do share it around. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and you can follow me on Twitter as well at JRRTLore. And until next time, this is the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.